What you're about to listen to is a Bry-Fy production. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Bry-Fy podcast. I'm your host, Bry-Fy, your comics guy, and today is another round of interviews, man. Last week we had a little bit of a break, but we're getting back into it. My guest this week has a fun little webcomic about an angry little monkey. So, you know what? That's just the introduction that I'm going to give him. We're just going to welcome Alex to the podcast. Alex, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, totally, dude. And of course, your angry little monkey that I'm talking about is Mr Butterchips.
Yeah, that's him.
I'm so glad that I got to meet you on Twitter, and I'm so glad that I got to check out this webcomic that you've been doing. Can you just tell us a little bit about just tell us a little bit about Mr. Butterchips?
Yeah, sure. So he's actually developed from a character I had that was part of an ensemble cast of characters from a failed comic strip submission, because for a while I was trying to get into the funnies, trying to get in with a syndicate that sold the newspapers and such. And so that comic strip obviously went nowhere, which was fine. And then I started working with an animation or a talent manager for the animation industry, and we sort of pitched that same cast of characters as an animated series and still fell flat. And upon review, I kind of realized that most of the characters were kind of dull and not very well developed, but Mr. Butterchips was always super compelling for me and just was a lot of fun to write and draw. So I was approached by an online magazine called Drunk Monkeys, which is not quite as contrived as it sounds. But I was approached by them in 2016 to start a ongoing comic. And so I just kind of reached back into the annals of, characters and ideas that I had, and Mr. Butterchips came to the forefront. So we started it. It was really an homage to underground comics of the 60s and 70s to begin with. And that pastiche lasted about 4 months until the 2016 election. And then we took a hard left into kind of socio-political commentary. For obvious reasons.
I think a lot changed.
Oh, yeah.
A lot changed in 2016.
Yeah.
But that's crazy,
times, man.
So, yeah, totally. But it's crazy. So, you wanted to get into like newspapers first, right? Like,
Yeah. So when I was a kid, my grandparents gifted me with this weighty tome called the Smithsonian Collection of Comic Strip News or Newspaper Comic Strips. So it had all of the classics, everything from the Yellow Kid, what's largely considered to be the first comic strip, all the way through to, I think it went about to the late 80s was where that collection stopped. So I was very influenced by all of those early artists, Winsor McCay and Chester Gould and just, Walt Kelly, all those classic guys. So, yeah, my objective initially was to get into comic strips and get into the newspapers. But as I soon found out, I was probably 23 or 24 when I really started doing that. So this was back in 2003. So this was about the time that newspapers and print media circulation in general was just in this nosedive. And so I was like the rat that abandoned the ship. I was just, like maybe I should find another, milieu or area to try out these specific skill sets.
Yeah, it's so tough, man. I was a big fan of newspaper comics. I grew up on stuff like Calvin the Hobbes, Beetle Bailey, of course, Peanuts.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, I was a very big fan of newspaper comics. And it's like you said, though, like, newspapers really nosedived. Like, there's just not the same that it is today as it used to be, 10 years ago. It's crazy.
Right. And to be honest, I mean, doing a little more research over the years, it was already basically dead by that point because the competition to have those comic strips, I mean, that was a really big selling point when all of the newspapers were owned individually. But by the time I was there, it was already, two or three monopolies that already owned all of the newspapers. So getting new comics, I mean, that's why, like you said, Beetle Bailey and, what's another one? Hagar the Horrible, any of those that started God knows what is it, 60s or 70s or something. They were still going because they didn't need anything new. It was this, and there was an outcry if those comics went away anyway. But definitely by the time I got there, it was a dying market for sure.
Yeah, totally. But luckily, the internet was a huge thing, man. So
Yeah.
I like I can only think that having the internet and being able to do web comics was helpful in getting your stuff out there, but maybe not helpful in getting paid for your stuff. Like I don't know. Like I'm not an artist. Like I don't.
No, I think both those points are fair. Yeah, the internet, and social media, they can be absolutely aggravating at times, but like you said, it's an avenue that really helps you get your work out there if you aren't with a syndicate, if you aren't with a, well-known publisher. So that was big for me. And I honestly had taken a few different detours from comics. And it was around 2015 that I actually, sat down and said, this is what I'm going to focus on. So from then to now, there's been a decent amount of progression. And I'm sure that's in large part due to being online and having that visibility that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Oh yeah, totally, man. And like it's kind of crazy because there are a lot of social commentary books out there, a lot of social commentary comics, but
Yeah.
Mr. Butterchips sets himself apart not only because he's not just a human, but I think the way that he tackles some of these issues, as I was reading from your website, he definitely has a very unique voice
Oh, good.
on
I'm glad to
certain
hear that.
matters. Oh yeah, totally. And so, I mean, like, what was the inspiration for him? Is he just kind of like a down on your luck type character, or did you have anything specific in mind with him?
I did. So again, when it started as more of an homage to underground comics, I found because he's an organ grinder's monkey, so they're inspired by the organ grinder and monkey that was on the wharf when I was a kid in Monterey, California. So
Hmm.
that was kind of the basis for it. And then it became evident to me that that was a really interesting sort of analogy for customer service jobs. So the idea was he's this, lower middle class guy scraping by in this customer service position. So that was really just the initial impetus behind the character was just to kind of cover that and go, it's this alcoholic monkey who sort of drinks to forget about his own woes, living paycheck to paycheck, etc. And again, when the 2016 election happened, it became obviously more of a vehicle for me to sort of spout my own frustrations. And I think part of the reason it may uh, differentiate itself from other like political cartoons is because I don't consider it a political cartoon. I consider it, it's social commentary to a degree, but it's also more just a commentary on, what I consider to be, morals or ethical. It's things like racism and, xenophobia in all of its forms. So it's more along those lines than trying to say the left is correct or the right is correct. So that may be why it's a little bit different than a lot of the other political cartoons, which tend to very much put across whether or not they're, on the left or the right.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I noticed is like he never fully just says Democrat, Republican,
Right.
conservative, or liberal. It is solely based, or at least in my opinion, it is solely based on morals, like you stated. Um,
Yeah.
which I, because I mean, oh, I always tell myself I'm never going to go there, but we have to go there. I mean, politically in this
Yeah.
climate, it's so frustrating. Like, I mean, I know a lot of conservative people that are very nice, but then you get gun ho about this person who is considered our president now,
Right.
who just morally these people would never agree with. Morally, these people will never been behind until all of a sudden now he has an R next to his name, and they're
Yeah.
defending him like he's the next coming of Jesus Christ, which it
Yeah.
baffles my mind. And I thankfully for you, there's tons of content now because of this, but
Absolutely. No, and that's
like,
kind of the joke of it too. Is I never considered doing political cartoons. It was not really in my wheelhouse per se, or anything that I had any interest in doing.
mm,
But like you said, I think after 2016, it got to a point where there was no avoiding it anymore, and it was going to come pouring out of me in one way or another. And Mr. Butterchips just turned out to be the perfect vessel for it.
100%, man. And like, even with me and podcasting, like, I've always been, well, let's just keep it about the comics. Let's just keep it
Right.
about this. But it's gotten it's gotten so, just the pressure has just been so tight that I can't just sit by anymore. It, like, with me using the podcast to help bring just to light some of the things, or like to just make things where people kind of understand them where I morally stand, is the same that you do with your comic. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not so much you're making fun of, like, just to poke fun of these people. You're trying to get the message across, like, do you guys see what's happening? It's so crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to your point, I think it's inescapable at this point because, we have the 24-hour news cycle, we have social media, this information, and this sort of torrent of horrifying stories are coming at us all the time. How do you pretend to sweep that under the rug? You just can't at this point. So that's definitely something that I was, like you said, I wasn't trying to necessarily say, the left is correct or the right is correct or wrong or whatever it was. It's more an idea of, who cares what your party affiliation is? This is wrong. That's more
Exactly.
of the I guess the place that I'm coming from with Mr. Butterchips is, you know, hate is wrong. Murder is wrong. These are not complex issues, but again, like you were saying, these people who, who have the R next to their name, and I know several Republicans who were lovely, rational people, and all of a sudden, they're just towing the party line, and that's all that matters. And it absolutely boggles my mind that they're just okay with going in lockstep with these terrible, horrifying things that are happening.
Exactly,
And
man.
so that's more of what Mr. Butterchips is for me, is just calling out some of that hypocrisy.
Definitely. And he does, like, what's great about Mr. Butterchips is, one, he's not afraid to call out things, like reading your comics. He's not afraid to call bullshit when it's bullshit. But he's
Right.
also not, he's not some white knight type character. He's very much someone who is flawed in his own way. But
Absolutely.
despite his flaws, he still has morals.
Yeah, he has anger issues. He's an alcoholic. This is not a perfect character in any sense of the word. But again, the idea was, this very flawed character, this nobody's infallible, nobody's perfect, but you can still know the difference between right and wrong. And the fact that it seems to be that this faction of people, specifically in our country in this day and age, tend to have a problem with seeing that, is, it just flabbergasting. So,
Right.
I get to sort of set that ablaze a little bit, with Mr. Butterchips. And I think two things, specifically, I think make it a little easier. Number one, it's not me saying it. It's not, a memoir comic or an autobiographical comic. It's a comic with a cartoon monkey. So that makes it a little bit easier. And then there's some surrealism and obvious played up things that that make it more cartoony, that I think make it a little more palatable too. That's not to say I haven't received a few, you know, hate mails about certain things that I was talking about, but I think overall people are more willing to read it and listen to it because it's not just some, you know, social justice war, even though I hate that term. But to the right, they wouldn't view it as that. It's not just some SJW coming at them and wagging their finger. It's this. He's the cartoon monkey. How serious? Like you should take it seriously, but how seriously do you really take it? And that's that line that I walk with the comic.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I mean, like with the hate mail, man, like how bad is it, like honestly, for you?
Funny enough, it's never the topics or opinions that I think are going to get hate mail. There's there was one where Mr. Butterchips has a couple of seagull friends who went south, for the winter, and
Oh
then
yeah, yeah, okay.
on their way back they got stopped by border patrol, and
Oh, the
we're
Eagles,
having
yeah.
yeah, the American Eagles, right? And we're having some trouble getting back into the country. And then so the gag is that they posted this thread on Twitter and then made sure that they still made their dinner reservation. So it was making fun of armchair activists a little bit, but hell, I do that too. So it's not a condemnation per se. But I got a couple of emails off of that from people saying, "How dare you, make fun of people when they're trying to help," and blah blah blah. And it's more absurd to me than anything else. It's like if you read the rest of the comic, even that one page or any of the other comics, I'm clearly, we're on the same side. And I guess that was the other weird part too. It wasn't even from conservatives or Republicans. It was from like, left wing people who read the magazine, which is more of a progressive liberal magazine. So that was
Yeah.
interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think, when sometimes when people get stuff out of context, they might not fully get the joke. They might not fully
Sure.
understand what's being made fun of. But at the same time, us as, liberal or Democrats, whatever you want to call us, we have to be able to call bullshit on ourselves when
Absolutely.
it's to that point. Like, because a lot of times I see this a lot where I live because I'm in bumfuck Texas, but Republicans will try to call foul on Democrats or liberals when they're like, well, how come it's okay for your people to be like that? And I'll tell them it's not okay.
No.
Like that's like if Hillary was doing the same things that Trump's were doing, that's not okay. I'm still not
Right.
100% okay with, I'm not okay with Benghazi. That's not a good thing. Do I still think she'd be better than what Trump is? Yes, I do, because
Absolutely.
but at the same time, I'm not saying they're perfect. Obama had his
Right.
faults at the same time,
Sure.
um, and I
But
think
God, would
what
I give anything to have him back in office?
right, and like even at this point, although I don't prefer Biden. I'm praying for Biden. Like I'm just like, dear
Sure.
God, give me this old white man. Like he's a
I
better
know.
old white man than the previous old white man right now.
I mean, that's kind of the
Uh,
joke, right? Is that's totally what America needs right now is another old white man, running the country. But like you said, he's a better. It's the lesser of two evils. And this idea that I've seen people on social media saying, well, not voting at all is better than voting for Biden. And
false.
I just don't understand that logic because you're essentially giving Trump another vote at that point for all intents and purposes. So this is going to be, if we're even able to have a fair election, it's going to be one of the most important of my life for sure. And I'll be 40 in September.
Yeah.
So for people to say they're gonna, sit on the bench for this one is a little bit aggravating.
Yeah, and I will say, no matter what side you vote for, I mean, you need to vote. If you're a voting
Yeah,
citizen or someone of age to vote, voting, as I have learned growing up, is the most important thing that you can do for your country. Um,
yeah,
and like I've only really gotten into politics here recently. I'm
sure,
only 30. I consider myself a young person still at 30,
yeah.
and so I'm very much learning things. And what I've learned is I do not like the way the country is going, and I'm going to do what I can to stop that.
Yeah, and I know for me, I'm sort of the same way. I don't think I was hugely involved in politics before 2016, but you start to unearth things and peel back the layers, and you find more and more things that are terribly wrong that need fixing, and it's kind of exhausting. So I guess,
Exactly.
yeah, so for me, Mr. Butterchips is also a way to maybe process that, and not to sound pretentious, like it's, high art, but it is a way for me to filter my thoughts and get those out so they're not eating me up inside, or I'm not just going on some social media rant, which nobody's going to read.
Yeah, and that was something I wanted to ask you. I mean, like, how much of Mr. Butter Chips is just, either it's just like you get so frustrated because I know I've been there, like, especially me being from South Texas,
Yeah,
I am very stressed. Let's just say that.
I can
um,
imagine.
and I only wish I had the creative know-how and ability to make a Mr. Butter Chips type character. I mean, how like is it very like is it cathartic or what's the word I'm looking for? Cathartic.
Cathartic.
Yeah, there you go, cathartic. Like, how positive is Mr. Butterchips for you?
Despite the appearance, and when you read it, it's incredibly cleansing for me to use Mr. Butterchips in that way. And I've had, a few installments where he's actually talking about love and appreciating one another, things like that. And then very quickly he says, "Oh, don't get mushy with me." But it's the idea that it's still there, and he's still he still has consideration and empathy for others. And I think those are two of the main things that are lacking from a specific set of our populace, which is why we have things like COVID-19 spreading, and why I'm, absolutely driven and bolstered to continue writing Mr. Butterchips.
Mm-hmm. And, that's one thing we haven't talked about. Mr. Butterchips does have or had a love life. I know there was a girl involved, and then she ends up leaving, and he has a inflatable girlfriend. But
She's always around.
yeah,
The
his
inflatable
side
girlfriend,
piece.
not the real one.
It's interesting to see, him develop though. Have other things than just being angry all the time. He
Yeah,
had someone that he cared about a lot.
he did, and I think there will be another storyline that comes around where he may find love again. But it's just been there has just been so many things to talk about that, and it's only a monthly strip, so there, I have to be very judicious in what I'm talking about, and for the most part, it's just been, you know things that are facing us every day.
Hmm. Yeah, and man, you might have to take this to like bi-weekly or something.
I
um,
know, to cover
especially
everything that needs to be covered. Yeah,
exactly, it's crazy, man.
so many
Just
issues.
so many, but also because I kind of like learning more about Mr. Butterchips. He's definitely an interesting character. He's not super likable, but he's definitely interesting. Much like, like a Deadpool type character, or just like that anti-hero type character
Yeah, I think
where
he's a friend you would invite out on occasion, and he'd be really great in small doses, which is why I think the monthly format works. Because if you had Mr. Butterchips all the time, I don't know if you would really want to continue reading him or
You might
spending
just
time with him.
you would get fed up with him. He's that friend where like one drink he's fine, but two drinks, crap, he needs to go home because
Yeah,
it's
there's
going to be a
that
bad night.
peak, right? There's that peak that he crests, and then you just don't want to be around him anymore. And
Definitely.
having said that, there's a long form story in the book that just came out with Mr. Butterchip. So hopefully I'm not turning people off from that.
Definitely. I know. I mean, let's talk more about this book that just came
Sure.
out. So like you said, it's not so much just like I call it creature of the week type format, but there's
Hmm.
some long form storytelling with this book.
There is. So it collects the 45 individual comics through it's from May 2016 to April of this year, I believe. So it's about 45 strips and they're all collected in there. And then I wrote and drew a 22-page standalone story which will only be found in that book. So it's a little bit of incentive hopefully for people to pick up the book. And it has a lot of the underground comics elements and influence baked in, but there's some social commentary in there. It's just not as overwhelming because, like what we were talking about, I think if it was the monthly comics put into long form, it would be very difficult to endure for that long of a story. So it's a lot more social commentary, but there's pop culture references, and it's basically an acid trip through San Francisco. So how bad could that be?
New band name right there. Acid Trip
Yeah.
Through San Francisco.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it was
No,
published by a publisher called SLG Publishing, and they were actually one of the first alternative indie publishers that I got into, when I was in my 20s. So, the early aughts. And they had been around before that and launched a bunch of names that, people would know today. So it's really kind of a full circle moment for me too, which has been kind of fun to experience.
What's up, nerds? This is Rich, the host of the Three Fat Nerds podcast. I would like to invite you to check out our podcast, available anywhere you get podcasts just by searching Three Fat Nerds. We are two shows on one channel. Late every Monday night, we release the flagship Three Fat Nerds podcast, where we discuss all things pop culture and nerdom. We talk about movies, shows, games, comics, and more. Then late every Thursday night, we release 3FNW, our pro wrestling podcast, where we give our thoughts and takes on the wrestling business. So listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, like us on Facebook, 3 Fat Nerds Podcast, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, at 3 Fat Nerds Pod, and most importantly, enjoy our musings. With that being said, there's only one thing left to say. Later, nerds!
oh yeah, totally. I do want to take a time out here to say, in honor of this podcast with Mr. Butterchips, I am drinking a sour beer called Sour Monkey, and
Nice.
it's
I
actually
didn't
one of
even know
my
that
favorite
existed.
sours. Yes,
That's
it's one of
great.
my favorite sour beers. It's from a brewer called Victory Brewing
Hmm.
Company.
Okay.
Um,
I'll have to
Man,
look
one of
them
the
up.
best sours I've ever had. Totally. I don't know where they're from because I'm very terrible at looking things up. But man,
Well,
I had to
clearly it's
laugh.
available, so
Oh yeah, totally. I got it. I don't know if Specs is a thing where you're from. It's
no.
a kind of like a liquor store, but it's like a big chain here in Texas.
Okay.
Uh, so they get a lot of cool stuff, especially a lot of local breweries in this area. But
Yeah, I think
I had a
Walgreens is more of what we're used to in the Bay
oh
Area.
wow.
There aren't a whole lot of chain liquor stores, to my knowledge.
Dang, yeah. No, it's funny that you say that though, because like Specs in here locally for me is like the only one that I know of.
Oh, okay.
I I guess you would say I'm kind of the Houston area. I'm about an hour outside of Houston, Texas,
Okay.
and so they're all over that place. But I just thought it was kind of poetic that I would be drinking Sour Monkey while talking about Mr. Butterchips.
Oh, very fitting because he is a sour monkey for sure. So that
Totally.
that
And
is right in there.
Oh yeah, and so Victory Brewing, if you're listening and need a mascot, Mr. Butterchips. No,
Yeah, give me a call. I need some money.
there you go. I mean, that's what we all need, right?
Or just buy some books. I'm okay with people just doing that too.
You know what? Just send me beer. It's fine. Like,
Sure. Buy the books, and then I will give you the mascot, and then you can just send free beer.
just free beer for the rest of it,
That's a
man.
pretty good trade-off, I think.
Yeah. So more about the book. Where can
Yes.
we pick it up at?
So it's online right now. The idea was we were going to do a very sort of grassroots thing where it was going to be available at conventions or in-store signings. And obviously, the pandemic has, thrown a bit of a monkey wrench in those gears. So it's just online right now. It's at Amazon. There's a link up. I don't know if it's on my website yet, but I've posted on Twitter, on Instagram. So if you're going to include the links for my pages on those sites, the link to Amazon is there.
Yes, sir.
And so it has a foreword by an editor named Kevin Kettner, who I've become good friends with, and he works for Dynamite. He wrote a very nice foreword. I have blurbs from a few of my industry friends, namely on the cover is Ruben Bowling, who does a comic called Tom the Dancing Bug. It's also kind of a satirical one, so it was nice to have his, blessing on the cover, and some really cool pinup art. There's like 6 or 7 illustrations from other great artists that are friends of mine. One of which is a guy named Keith Knight, who does a comic called K Chronicles. He does a single panel called Think. He does a syndicated comic strip, steering that back around to syndicated comics called The Nightlife. And he also has a show coming out soon on Hulu called Woke. So I have a
Whoa,
sketch from him in the book.
that's pretty impressive, man.
Yeah.
Hulu.
Yeah. Look for Woke on Hulu. I'm giving Keith a plug here.
There you go. It's free advertising.
How like altruistic is that I'm supposed to be talking about my book and I'm plugging my buddies?
That's just the sign of a guy who has morals, who is a good person, much like
and
Butterchips.
and doesn't think before he speaks, also much like Butterchips.
You know, we all do. Like, oh
No, of
god,
course.
if I had just a highlight reel of things that I've said without thinking on this podcast, I probably wouldn't be airing anymore.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean
that's
Butterchips
some.
is oh sorry.
No, you go ahead, man.
I was just say Butterchips is one of those characters, and there's been several throughout the course of comics and animation where I feel like he's one of those characters that says what a lot of people are thinking. So there's some connection there, and people have actually written me and told me that. So it's been nice to have people connect to him on that level and not just be like, yeah, I'm a drunk too. Okay, well maybe read some more of the strips and get back to me.
Hey, man, I feel personally attacked now because no.
No, that's fine. If that's one of the connections that you have to him, I'm perfectly okay with that. But hopefully there's a little
There
more
we go.
substance than just the drunk monkey. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want your tagline to be, "Hey, are you an alcoholic? Do I have the character
Right.
for you?"
Right. Not so
No, totally.
much.
And I mean, hey, you talked about a lot of the people who have, like the guy who has the forward in your book. I mean, being attached to Dynamite Comics in
Hmm.
some way, that's a pretty legit thing, dude. Dynamite's been, pun intended, dynamite. Especially with
Yeah,
their
I've
Power
in the past
Rangers
couple of
and
years, right?
yeah.
Their all their licensed stuff. The past couple of years, I've been very lucky to make some friends, at venerable places because it's very easy as an artist and a comics artist. I mean, I guess any artist in any field to feel lost, especially with the vast ocean of online content. And it's very easy to get down and defeated. So it's been nice to meet some people with a lot of experience in the industry tell me that they think what I'm doing has some merit. And it sounds, I guess egotistical in a way, but I think we all need that bump every once in a while. Just something to let us know and encourage us that what we're doing is worth continuing.
Exactly. I mean, 100%. I agree with you on that sentiment. You know, it's you need validation at some point,
Sure.
whether it's validating that they're offended by it, whether it's validating that they support it, just the fact that someone is saying, "Hey, I read your stuff, I listened to your stuff, and I X about it." You know, I love, hate, whatever. You know, just that validation of knowing that what you're doing is affecting someone else is something that I think we all need as humans. You know.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I've always said. People who read my strip, I would like the reactions to be either I love it or I hate it. Because apathy means that you weren't affecting them at all, which is, for me, kind of the kiss of death. I would rather people absolutely loathe my work because you've at least affected them. You know, you've gotten to them in some way. So that's kind of the point of art for me is to elicit strong reactions. So if people hate what I do, that's fine. If people are just kind of so or indifferent, I feel like that's more of an affront to me than people who hate it.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I definitely get strong reactions from reading Mr. Butterchips. A lot of it is because I understand the situations and I get frustrated by them, much like he does.
Yeah,
Especially living in the South, man. You hear a lot of the people say things, and it's crazy. You know, definitely
yeah,
like pro life stuff. But what about people affected by COVID? Oh, my body,
yeah.
my
Fuck them.
rules. Right? Like,
They're no longer a
um,
fetus. We don't have to protect them. Once you're out of the birthing canal, you're no longer our problem. That's one of those really weird arguments that
it
I could
is
probably do several comics on. But I mean, it's those kind of notions too that keep me going and give me something to write about.
exactly, man. And you know, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but you have a plethora, just so much content right now.
Oh, it's a never-ending avalanche, and yeah, it's sort of a blessing and a curse, I suppose.
Right, it's crazy, man. But I've we've been talking for a while. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, dude. Where can people find you?
My regular website is alexschumacherart.com. My Instagram and Twitter, the handles are both at AJ Schumacher Art. So I imagine you might put those online somewhere so people know the spelling of Schumacher.
Definitely, I'll
But
help
those
you
are
out.
those are the main places where I can be found. And one other thing, I was actually signed by a literary agent last year, so we'll be pitching a new graphic novel coming up here soon. So hopefully people will follow me and continue on the journey with Mr. Butterchips and my other web comic Decades of Inexperience. And we're starting right at the beginning process of pitching a new book now. So I'd love people to come along for the ride.
Yeah, definitely. Can you give us a little hint at what the new book might be about?
Yeah, it's a very basic level. It's a middle grade one, so ages 9 through 12 roughly. That's sort of the hot demographic right now. And
Okay.
it's based around a brother and a sister who are preparing for their bar mitzvah while something else very serious is going on in their life. And I don't want to give away too much more because I think that might spoil it. But that's the basic premise. So and I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish, so it's very much based. It's like a love letter to my grandparents and my faith, and I think those kind of diverse voices are what um, publishers are kind of looking for right now too.
Oh yeah, totally, man. And eh, just a little bit on that, man. It's been crazy seeing what's been going on with the NBA here
Oh yeah,
about like these comments from some of these players, which I don't understand. Like,
yeah,
so I'm sorry that you have to go through this kind of shit, man. It
yeah, and
sucks.
right, and for me, it's not even as bad. I can pass as a white cis male kind of thing. And as soon as people find out I'm Jewish, it's a different story. But people of color or women, they can't exactly hide that. So, they have it a lot worse than I do. And I'm really glad that the trade publishers who are doing graphic novels right now are focusing on those voices and really giving them a platform. I think that's incredibly important right now. So
Definitely.
yeah, that makes me happy that that's happening. And if I can be a small part of that, that would be enough for me.
Totally, man. And good luck to you in this new book. I hope good things are coming for it. Any Mr. Butterchip cameos planned?
No, not that I have in mind right now. I kind of do it by the seat of my pants, so we'll see. But as we get closer to the election, maybe.
Right.
I'll just say
No,
that.
you could totally do. You could do a stuffed animal. It just sits on the
Sure,
bed and just
sure.
call. No.
Some sort of punching bag with a face on it that may or may
Right.
not be some sort of political candidate.
All right, Alex, man. It was great talking to you, dude. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Brian. It was great talking to you too.